Welcome. In this video, we will look at some basic commands that are helpful when using the command line. In the last video, we talked about some basic command line terms, but now let's jump into some of the most useful commands you'll need when working with the command line. The first command we need to know is pwd. This will tell us the current folder or directory that we're in. In general, when we're talking about the command line, you'll hear the term directory used instead of folder. Next up, we have cd or change directory. This is going to be the primary command that allows us to drill in and navigate back up through folder structures. Then we have ls for listing items in a directory. This is another very common command you're going to run because it lets you see everything that's listed out inside of a directory. Then we have commands touch, which allows us to create a file, make directory, which allows us to create an entire directory, and then some additional commands for copying, moving, and deleting files and folders. So this stack right here is going to be the core set of commands that you'll want to know and get comfortable with. You don't need to have them memorized at this point, but really quickly you'll find that you could do a lot with just these, and because they are so short and so few of them, you will memorize them pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and switch over to terminal and see some of this in action. So I have my terminal command open here, and the first thing I'm going to type is pwd. And this will give us our current working directory. We could see that we're inside of our users folder, inside of the folder Zac Gordon. And this on a Mac is going to be the primary folder, your root home folder for a particular user. And we know that when we see this tilde here, that this designates that we are inside of this root user folder. So before I show you the change directory command, let's use that list command and just type ls, and we'll see all of the files, or in this case, it's just folders that are visible for us. And from here, now we could use the cd command or change directory, and I'm going to try going into my desktop. So I'm going to do cd desktop. And notice that I don't have to put any spaces here or anything else, but if I had a folder name that had a space in it, let's say it was called my desktop, if your folders have spaces in them, then you would have to type them like this. And I'll show you that later, but for now we're just doing one word, so we could just type my desktop, hit enter, and notice now that the folder here, desktop, or the current directory, has changed. And if we run pwd for present working directory or print working directory, then we will see that we're inside of the desktop folder. So that's how to change directories into a folder. Let's go back out. This will look familiar for anybody who's done HTML. This means that we're going back out a folder. And so now when I do my present working directory, we could see that I'm back in my Zac Gordon folder. So now let's try creating some files. So I'm going to cd back into my desktop. I'm going to ls to see what's there, and we've got nothing listed. So let's go ahead and create ourselves a little test folder. So in order to make a directory, I'm going to type mkdir for make directory, and then I could simply type the name of my directory. So in this case, I just wanted to do test or demo, and you could do it as one word, but remember that if you want it to be two words, then you would need to wrap it in quotation marks like this. So let's just run that and then run ls again, and we could see, okay, I've got my demo. That's great. Let's cd into my demo. Oh, I'm sorry. I said you need quotation marks there. You wouldn't need quotation marks if there's a hyphen. What you would need, let's go back out. We could see my demo. Let's run cd my demo like this. Oh, that's telling us we don't have it yet. So actually I wanted to do make directory my demo and then ls, and we'll see that we have both of these. So now I'm getting really low to the bottom of the screen here, and there's a really easy way. Just Control L on a Mac will wipe all that up to the top, but if I scroll up now, I could still see everything I did. So if you're ever getting low on a screen, you could just hit Control L. So let's catch up again with where we are. pwd, I'm in my desktop, And let's see what's listed in my desktop. I've got a My Demo folder and a My Demo. So let's go ahead and go into one of these. I'll go into this new one, My Demo, just to demonstrate how you would change directories when you have spaces that it needs to be in a string. So that's great. And then let's go ahead now and create a file. So to do this, we would do touchindex.html, whatever the name of the file is that we want to create. I could create another one, touchstyle.css. And now when I ls, notice that I have both of those files. That's great. Let's say I create a readme.txt file. Oh, I didn't say touch, so it's touch readme.txt. And now I didn't want that readme.txt to be a txt file, so I want to delete that. So now we get into the deleting territory, and we're jumping ahead a little bit. We'll come back to copy and move in a second. But the delete command is very simple. It's simply for files, it's rm, and then whatever the file is, and it's gone. So if I ls now, it's gone permanently. And for this reason, I would actually strongly suggest not using rm, or if we make a directory, and now we see this dummy directory, if we want to remove that, it's rmdir for remove directory, and we'll just say dummy, list that again, and notice that it's gone. So I'll do Control L again to clear my screen, get back up to the top. So that's rm and rmdir for removing files, but I would suggest not using this. In the next video, you're going to learn about trash and how to move stuff to the trash instead, and that's going to be a lot better to do, just because you won't permanently remove them, and there's no undo option for these delete commands. So in general, I'd say you know them, but stay away from them for now. And let's talk about working with this copying and moving files. Okay, so I'm in my Demo folder, and let's just go ahead and list out now. We could see we have our two files. And let's imagine a scenario that's not too uncommon. Let's say that we wanted to move our style.css file into a CSS folder, and we were adding more CSS files, so we wanted to have our own folder for that. That would make a lot of sense, and let's just take a look at how we could quickly create a directory using mk directory. And now when we list it out, we could see we have a CSS folder. And if we want to move a file into another location, it's pretty simple. We simply say mv for move, and then the file that we want to use. And notice that I'm just typing style.css because I'm already in the My Demo folder. But if I were in a different folder, I could still access this by just typing out the full path from where I am to that file. So I'm going to move this now into my CSS file, and I'm going to still call it style.css. So the format for using move and copy are exactly the same. You type the command, and then you type the original source file that you want, using whatever path you need to get to it, and then you put in the new path, including the name of the file that you want. So once I do this, and now when I list out my files, we can see that we just have our CSS folder and our index file here, and when I cd into CSS, notice now I've got my style file. Okay, so that works pretty well. Let's cd back, and let's just move our style file back again. So let's do the inverse process. Let's do move css style.css, because notice I'm in my Demo folder. So I need to say move it from the CSS file folder where it is, and then just move it back into the root. And because I'm not going to put anything before style.css here, it's just going to move it into the root folder where I am, which is My Demo. So let's go ahead and move that back. ls, I can cd into my CSS file folder, and notice that it is now empty. So I'll come back, I'm in my Demo folder, and now let's look at how we could do the same thing but using copy. So if I list out my files, I've got my style, index, and my CSS folder. So let's say that instead of just moving this file, I wanted to use style.css as a duplicate for a new file, and I just wanted to duplicate it and then customize it and go further from there. So there's a couple ways I could do this. I could do CP for copy, and I'm going to just say style.css. I'm going to copy it into my CSS folder. So we could do that, and notice that if I CD into CSS now, the style's there, but also if I CD back into my demo, it's also there. So we have both of these. I'm going to delete this and show, no, I don't have to delete it. I'll show you one other thing you could do. You could say copy style.css into the CSS folder, but just call it new style.css instead. So we could actually rename it as part of the process. Oops, it doesn't look like that is possible. Let's try that again. We want to use the mv command. So let's see here. It's CSS new style.css. Okay, this isn't working, not because I used the wrong one, because I'm in my CSS folder. So when I type copy the style, it's not finding it. So let's just make sure that we're in the right folder here. If I CD into CSS, okay, I've got my style there. Let's CD back out. And now we could do, let's copy style.css into our CSS folder, and let's call it new style.css. So now if I CD into my CSS folder, notice that I've got my new style and I've got my style.css. I'm going to come back out. Oops, sorry, need to CD. So the command and then the parameter. Okay, so what else could we do? I showed you that you could do the copy. You could also do the same thing with the move command, style.css. Now this isn't going to create a duplicate of it with a new name, but we could rename it in part of the moving process. And let's just say we wanted to move it into our CSS and call it our old style.css. Now when I list out, I see I've only got my index file, and I could CD in to my CSS file. And now I've got my new style, which was a copy and a rename. I've got my old style, which was a move and a rename, and I have my style.css, which was simply a copy or a move, depending on how we want to do that. So now I'm inside my CSS. Let me just do a move one more time, and I'm going to move my style.css, and this time I have to put it back one folder, and I just want to place it back into my main root directory. So now when I list out in my CSS file, or CSS folder, I've only got the new and old styles, and if I CD back and list out, now I've got my style back. So let's look at a few more things before we jump back into taking this further. So notice that I'm in my demo folder right now, and if I ever want to get back to the root of my site, into my main Zac Gordon folder, I can just type cd tilde. So we've looked at a lot so far. We looked at how to get our current directory, how to change directories, both moving up and down. We looked at how to list items in a directory, how to touch files or create them, how to create directories, how to delete them, how to move and copy them. But what we haven't looked at yet are many of the options. So each of these different commands comes with several options, and I want to show you quickly what these options look like and how to take those further. So we looked before at the ls command, and we could see that it has this basic functionality of listing stuff out. Now it also has a few options. We could do ls-l, and this is going to give us a long formatted view of our list. And notice that we're doing the short format for typing in options. We're just doing a hyphen and then the first letter of it. So in this case, the long format. And we could see all of our files, all of our folders here in a bit more depth. So that's ls-l. Now we could take this one step further with ls-a-l, and what this is going to do is show all files. So notice that I have a number of hidden files, some of these like the ZS HRC file, we're going to be looking at in the next video when working with ZSH as an alternative shell to bash. But this format and this command, ls-al, is a way of using options on top of these. Now, the other commands that we looked at do not have as many options, but you should check out the link in the show notes that will take you to some cheat sheets and some more in-depth references, because there are options for some of these that you may want to look up and familiarize yourself. But besides that ls-al, we're not really going to go into too much depth on them now, although as we use the command line more and more throughout this course, you'll become familiar with more of them. So now that we've looked at these basic commands, I want to show you a few more helpful tips that you might find handy when getting yourself comfortable with the command line. So the first one of these tips is that you could clear your screen. And there are two different ways of doing this. I showed you one which will just move everything up, but you could also do a hard clear, and I'll show you what that looks like after we go through the rest of this list of tips. But clearing the screen is a really helpful, important thing to know. You also have a built-in command history, so you could simply use the up key, and this will go backwards through all of the past commands, and this helps you not have to type things as much or find quick access to something that you might not remember how you did. The command history is really helpful there. We also have a tab autocomplete feature where if we begin typing the beginning of a file or directory name, we could just tab to go through the rest of it. So that's a really helpful feature that will definitely cut down on how long it takes to type names. We also can drag and drop in folder names to change around folders, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Then one of the powerful things about working with Bash and Linux is that you can pipe commands together. So this is going to be using the pipe character or the vertical line to be able to put two commands on one line and have them execute right after one another. So I'll show you an example of that as well. Then we have the open command, and open is really great because it will pop open whatever folder or file you want inside of Finder. This allows you to quickly sync up where you are in the command line somewhere and find those files inside of Finder. But there are also some options for different code editors like Atom, where you could open up a whole directory or a specific file directly in your code editor of choice. So that's really helpful. And then the final one I want to mention are the head and tail commands. And these are pretty cool. These will open up and show you a quick preview of just the beginning or end of a file. So if you're in the command line and you just want to check, hey, is this the right file? I just want to take a peek at the head of this. You could quickly and easily do that. So let's jump back into Terminal and let's look at a few of these options now in a bit more depth. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you in Terminal is how to clear out your screen. Let's do a big ls-al on our root folder, and this should show you a whole bunch of stuff that probably fills up your screen. If not, still a good way to easily test it. So there are two ways to do this. The first is holding down Control-L on a Mac, and that's simply going to bump everything that we saw before up above the screen. So I could still scroll up and see all of this. Let's run that command again, ls-al for everything long view. And now I'm going to do another one of hard clearing everything. So now I'm going to hit Command K, and that will wipe everything, but I'm scrolling up right now and we're not seeing anything above the fold. So you have Control L to just bump everything up, clear out the line, and then you have Command K, which is going to do a hard reset on everything. So depending on your preference, you may want to use one or both of those. However, regardless of what you do, we always have a command history. So simply by pressing the up key, I could circle back through all of the old commands or down. So this is really helpful if you're commonly, let's say you have a Git flow and you're commonly adding stuff, committing stuff, pushing stuff, adding stuff, committing stuff, pushing stuff over and over and over again, these three kind of commands, then you could do some shortcuts here. You could just press up, hit it again, up, hit it again, in order to get your command history really quick there. So that's a great thing. Now let's look at the autocomplete. This is so helpful, and I didn't show you this before, but before you really start using Terminal on a daily basis, you're really going to want to know how to do this. So I could do CD desk, notice I just hit DES and then I hit tab and it auto-completed. Now let's say I wanted to go into my folder, I could hit tab again and it will autocomplete. Notice I showed you before that you have to put something in strings. Oops, hold on, let's try that again. The exception to that is if you use the backslash here like this, it's going to escape the next character. So we could either write it like this, where we put the quotation marks, and having this in between is fine. We don't have to have the quotation marks around the entire thing. We could just do the part that we want, that particular folder. Or, as you see, it's going to autocomplete doing this, which is going to be the same thing. So that will be quite helpful if you're working with a lot of folders and you don't want to type them all. This is so helpful to be able to just do tab autocomplete, C again, desktop, boom, right there, M, tab, space, right there, really fast, really quick. So that tab autocomplete, super helpful thing to know about. The next thing I want to talk about is piping. So let's go back down into our desktop. And remember, we have our My Demo folder. So let's cd back into My Demo. I just hit tab to autocomplete, my tab. And we've got some files and folders in here. So now let's think of a scenario where we'd want to pipe something. Let's say I'm going to create a readme.md file now. And then after I do that, I want to list out all the files again. So I'm going to do readme.md. Whoop, I need to do touch here. Let's do touch readme.md. Then I'm going to use the pipe character and then ls. So what this is going to do is it's going to execute readme.md, wait, and then execute ls. Or not really wait, it's going to run it right after. So if I do this again, notice that it added the new readme file and it piped in the ls command. Now, before you get too excited about this, there are some things that don't really work with piping, or you have to write a custom way. So you would think you should be able to do cc or cd into the CSS directory, but this actually doesn't work. Notice that neither command executes. So with this particular one, we actually have to type it a little bit differently using what are called subshells. And if we do it this way, then it works. So this is just for the cd command. Most of the other things will pipe pretty well, but sometimes you might have to write it in slightly a different format. So notice again that just doing cd, CSS, and then piping ls didn't work. But then if we wrote it in this format, it did. And it's a little bit outside of the scope of this course to go into all the differences and where you might find those. But what I would recommend is you just get really comfortable Google searching and searching, DuckDuckGo, the command line, commands and options, tips. Hey, why doesn't this work? Or how do I do this? And you'll just begin picking up little bits and pieces along the way that will make a lot of sense. I've included the link in the video notes to why this particular thing works this way with CD. But in general, piping is a good thing to know about and quite helpful. So let's go back out a folder. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I want to be in my demo. And let's reset the page here. Okay, so now let's talk about open. Open is great. And what I could do, let's see, we've got, let's just say I want to find this folder in Finder. I could simply type open period, and that will open up the current folder inside of Finder. So if I pop out a full screen here, we could see that this popped this up right here, and I know exactly where I am. I can close it down, CD out to my home, simply type open, and then it will open that folder. Now, the reverse is true too. Let's say that I wanted to CD to a folder. I could simply from from Finder, drag and drop any folder directly into Terminal, and it will copy and paste that link. So if I wanted to, let's say, delete a certain file or something, or copy a certain file, let's use that example. If I wanted to copy this style.css file, notice that I could drag that in, and it will put in the full link all the way to that. So once I have that, then I could simply paste that in, and let's say I want to put it inside CSS, another. And notice now that when I'm doing copy, I'm doing it remotely, so I don't have to, I'm not doing it remotely, but this copy could have been done from anywhere because it's giving this full reference to the actual file. So I'm inside of my demo, but you could be outside of it as well, and still run this from like the root or something. It would still work. So all of this is to point out, though, that you can open a file or open a folder inside of Finder, find it, but also that you can drag and drop folders and files inside if you want to get their full paths. So this is really helpful, but rather than using the open command, what I tend to use a lot is Atom. And I could type Atom period, and it will launch for me Atom with the actual directory there as the root and all the files that I could access. We could also do something a little bit different. Let's say that, let's look at what we've got here again. Let's say that I wanted to open my style.css file specifically. So I could say Atom style.css, and boom, it will pop it open for us right away. So this is really helpful because there are a lot of times when we're working inside of terminal or inside the command line and we don't have a quick, easy way to click around to get to the files that we're looking at. We don't know where they are in Finder, or it would take us a while to find them, etc. So it's really easy to use these shortcuts, and most editors and different apps will have those. You could look around if you're using Sublime or WebStorm or something. They all have these options, but since we're using Atom primarily, I'll show this one here. And again, just something that I think is really helpful to have. So let me go ahead and I'm just going to put some, I'm just putting some comments in here, and then I'm going to break down, and I'll show you why in a second. Okay, so let's just put this a few more breaks and then a comment in the middle. Makes sense why in a second here. Okay, so here's my style.css file. I've got it edited. I've just got some basic text in it. The last two commands that I think you might find helpful, depending on your use of working with terminal, are the head and tail commands. So I have my style.css file here. I'm just going to run head style.css, and it will print out the top basic lines from that file. And tail, as you could probably guess, is going to do something very similar. It will print out the end files. Now you'll remember I put a bunch of space in between, and that was just to show you. Otherwise, head and tail would have shown the exact same thing, but this just shows the first couple lines here, and then tail shows the end. And I find this really helpful if you're just trying to quickly figure out if you have the right file. Maybe you have different iterations of stuff and you want to make sure you're working on the right thing. Head and tail are really helpful for that. So then you don't have to open it up in your text editor. You don't have to switch environments. You could just quickly preview it right then and there. Okay, so that takes us through things like clearing the screen, having a history of commands, autocomplete with tab, piping characters together, opening stuff up in Finder or in Atom, and then the head and tail commands for preview. And at this point, you've got a pretty solid basis to working with the command line. And the thing everybody says about the command line that's great, in addition to its power, is that it really isn't too hard to learn because there aren't too many commands. Really, this list of basic commands that we have here from pwd, cd, ls, touch, make directory, copy, move, and deleting, these are the basic things that you'll need to know. And these are, your Linux bash commands for working with navigating, moving files around, things like that. As we move forward into the different tools, then we'll learn commands that are specific for those tools, but the basic framework and the syntax is going to be the same, and you'll still have to use commands like these. So for that reason, I'm really going to suggest some practice here. And the best way to practice this is just in your day-to-day, open up the command line and start using it. Try to start using it with the basic commands we've looked at. Use it for navigating around stuff. So before you open up Atom and navigate your files the same way, try getting there with the command line first. Or before you copy something real quick or move it around, just dragging and dropping, try it in the command line. You're definitely going to find that some things are easier and speed up your time, and that some things don't. So the next thing is make sure you use some of those best practices I showed you about. If you don't use history and you don't use the tab autocomplete, you're doing way too much work. So leveraging the up key and the tab key for autocomplete, up key for history, tab key for autocomplete is really going to make the difference and make this a much more manageable, faster, enjoyable experience. So in addition to that, I'd suggest trying some different console environments. So we've looked at terminal. There's also iTerm2, but particularly what I'd like you to focus on is using your coding environment for accessing the command line and seeing how that feels. So both WebStorm and Atom, which we looked at, have command lines built into them, and you could go back and look at those videos. I show how to set that up, how to access it, and the exact same commands that work here are going to work there. So take the time to start practicing this, put it into your daily routine over the next couple days, the next couple weeks. Try to start using the command line more and more on your own. You may find it's not helpful and you're like, oh man, there's real no point in this. But at least you'll get familiar with it. And as we move on to looking at more and more tools, all of the tools we look at from here on out, for the most part, run in the command line. So we're going to have to get comfortable moving folders, navigating around, going in and out, changing directories, checking if stuff is installed, that sort of thing. So it's best that you start doing it now just as part of your daily routine. So once you've done that, and once you've got comfortable with that, then you could go into the next video where we're going to go way, way further into customizing and taking the command line even further than we have with these basics. So I really wouldn't suggest you do that until you start practicing and get comfortable with these basic commands, because it's going to be a whole nother level of customization and access once we get to that point. But once you're ready, then go ahead and jump into the next video where we'll look at taking the command line further.